Welcome to What Do You Do? The podcast that dives into the fascinating realm of STEM careers. We explore the stories behind various professions and the paths people take to achieve their roles, offering invaluable tips for those eager to follow in their footsteps. Get ready to delve into the journey of innovation and leadership in STEM.
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me. So I'm Paul Marganski, and I am what I would say is a senior program leader or program manager for life sciences. So I specialize in medical device and pharmaceutical biotech program management in general.
And how did you find your way into program and project management? Because I
Yeah.
saw you're a chemical engineer by trade. You did some engineering early on in your career. Tell us a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. And so I went to school for chemical engineering, as you said, and I really enjoyed it. Wonderful program at University of New Haven in Connecticut. And I really enjoyed it. And traditionally, chemical engineering, at the time, I'm not sure I knew the full scope when I signed up for chemical engineering way back. And so, I knew I loved science and I loved math. And those are sort of my natural, I'm wired that way. I come from a family of engineers. So I knew I wanted to do something with chemistry and engineering, and it kind of fit. And, I was told there's a lot of opportunities with chemical engineering in general. Traditionally, you design reactors, heat exchangers, these kinds of things, either for petroleum engineering or chemical processes. I found my way into the semiconductor industry out of college. And for about 10 years, I was doing hands-on research and also doing new product development for a semiconductor materials company, and had a lot of fun. I was in the lab a good part of that time. Also did some pseudo project management, and I say pseudo only because they didn't have your typical project management office or PMO, but it was sort of run through R&D. So I had a lot of fun there. And then after about 10 years, being in Connecticut, there's not a large, certainly not at that time, not very much in terms of semiconductor in the Northeast. So, I made a decision, that if I wanted to pursue that, I'd probably have to move out west. And, while I enjoyed the work very much, my heart really is in healthcare. And comes partially because I come from a large family, fairly large family. And, somebody's always either exposed to somebody that's ill or somebody in the family is ill or something. And so I came to appreciate over the years, even that much more, how much of an impact, even indirectly, that I could have by working in that industry and just learning more about it. And I'm just naturally, the further along I go in my career, the more I kind of second guess that I probably should have gone for biomedical engineering, which one of my older brothers did do. And for whatever reason, I didn't latch on to that when I chose my major. But now I live and breathe health sciences. So,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I don't know if you want me to jump in at all to the companies, but the first one off the bat was actually Medtronic, which is a very large medical device company. And I spent about close to 10 years there as well, doing very heavy project management and bringing medical devices from very early concept stage through commercialization. And I got to work on some really, really exciting projects and products in the time I was there. And then after that, I got into pharma and bio, and maybe we could get a bit into that. I don't want to jump the gun too much, but.
Yeah, I appreciate your enthusiasm for this as well. So how did you find Medtronic? Coming from semiconductors, was that just because the local area or what drew you there?
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a geographic thing. Again, much like the semiconductor, at that time, there was not a lot of healthcare in Connecticut, or certainly not a life sciences type company, meaning there's plenty of insurance companies in Connecticut. That's kind of what they're known for. And it's kind of gone the other way over the last 20 years or so. where insurance companies, there's still obviously some in Connecticut, but the New Haven, Connecticut area really has become sort of a local hub of biotech, not even counting Medtronic, which is more medical device. But there's a lot of biotech and pharma in New Haven area. And Medtronic is about, 10 minutes. They're actually in North Haven, which is fairly close to New Haven. We're about 10 minutes away. And so that was the quote unquote large company in Connecticut, or one of, for medical devices at the time. And so, I interviewed, they had a job fair, I interviewed there, and pretty quickly was able to find something with Medtronic. Like I said, I spent about 10 years there. And so it was an easy transition for me because I was still early in my career. I had a research background, which they were looking for people that had technical background, but also, sort of that desire to grow with a large company, which I certainly have and had at the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then tell us a little bit about your journey in project and program management. How has it evolved over time since you started?
Yeah, yeah. So with Medtronic, I started with an operations. So it was more on the manufacturing side, meaning I would start sort of midstream project. So not necessarily working on a very early stage, but more midstream, where the concept was devised and sort of designed at that point, more or less. There still were some design tweaks, but sort of at the point where we could do some equipment ordering for manufacturing, and also injection molded parts, or different types of parts that go onto the actual devices, the medical devices themselves. And so my task at that point was to really bring in and help qualify the equipment and the process to be able to manufacture these devices. So in an R&D sense, it's easy, quote unquote, easy, relatively speaking, to make one or two devices, but to do it in a way where you can make thousands at a time, and support programs where you're doing, not a couple million a year, but, potentially billions of dollars a year off of one product line. You have to make sure everything's done repeatably. And it takes, a lot of work to go from a one or two type product design to making thousands of these things, per day, let's say. So that's kind of where my program management started, was sort of midstream there through commercialization. And that was for about the first 4 years I was there. And then I made a transition to their Office of Project Management, which is PMO, where I was sort of given the entire scope of the project from very early stage through product launch and transfer to sustaining manufacturing. So basically the full life cycle of the project. And I sort of specialized for their soft tissue and biosurgery platforms, as well as mechanical devices. So that would be anything from sutures to, so mechanical devices might be a mesh placement device for hernia surgeries. And biosurgery, one of the big products was called Veriset, but basically an active hemostat. So when you have a internal surgery, they're, removing part of a cancerous tumor from an organ, you can actually use the Veriset product. It's basically a Band-Aid on steroids, I like to call it, where you use this synthetic patch to cover the wound. Once you remove the cancer, it would bleed a lot by nature. So as opposed to cauterizing it or burning the wound to stop the bleeding, you actually put the synthetic bandage internal, close up the wound, close up the patient, and that stops the bleeding within about 30 seconds. So it's like a super, again, they know that Band-Aid on steroid, stops the bleeding.
That's awesome.
And it's a really neat product, but a lot goes into that. That was a 9-year program, or at least the 9 years plus that I was there, to do animal studies, human clinical trials. We actually had to move the manufacturing facility from a pilot facility to a manufacturable, a larger manufacturing facility, which happened to be North Haven, Connecticut. And, multiple regulatory filings. And so these things have to go through, jump through a lot of regulatory hurdles in order to get approved to be put in humans, obviously, hence the clinical trial, but also to be able to sell and market that for, the general public to be able to use. So it has to receive FDA approval, or in this case, it was EU approval. It was not, so far, has not been launched in the United States, mostly for cost reasons, because the cost of doing clinical trials in the United States is very, very high. And so they want to make sure that the product is successful for a certain length of time in the EU and the rest of the world before they invest the money into the United States. So right now it's not available in the US, but long term it might be, depending on how the market shakes out. But that said, the product is very successful in other parts of the globe. It's a really, really neat product.
That's really cool. And it's really
Yeah.
neat how you're learning all about these different products
Yeah, it's not
through
like I came
program
into
and
this
project
knowing
management.
anything. I knew
Yeah.
pieces and parts of how these things would theoretically work, but to learn on the job is one of the best things. That's one of the best features of the job, is being able to learn as you go and to be able to have a real appreciation of, how the heck do these things get into humans to begin with, and from a regulatory standpoint, so from a legal standpoint, but also from a business standpoint and from a clinical standpoint, all the things have to fit together in order to bring these products to market. And it's a lot of cost that somebody like a Medtronic or anyone has to invest in order for some percentage of these to get through from, very beginning stage all the way through, because you have a lot of failures too. And so that's
Yeah.
why, when people wonder why drugs or whatever, what have you, cost so much, I mean, you're paying for all the failures as well as the winners. So,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So what advice would you give someone who's looking to break into project or program management? I know you mentioned like learning on the job, which is awesome.
yeah, there's a few different paths you can go. I went more maybe a non-traditional path, but I think a lot of project managers kind of take the non-traditional path. So maybe the non-traditional path is the traditional path, but there are programs where you can actually go to school for program management or project management. But I've been far more exposed to people that take the non-standard path, which would be you start in maybe a technical career or a individual contributor role, and then you work your way into overseeing projects, and at some point, overseeing people perhaps, or individual contributors on the programs, in order to make sure that you have the right resources to be working on various projects. So, I, prior to Medtronic, I did say I had a little bit of exposure to project management with ATMI was the semiconductor company I worked for. They were bought out by Integris, but neither here nor there. Really, it became, I did company internal company training both at ATMI and at Medtronic to hone my skills, both in program management, but as well as I'm a Six Sigma black belt, and on paper, if you're not aware of what a black belt Six Sigma is, it's not a karate thing. It is a way of approaching a process and being able to manufacture something with a certain integrity, let's say, or a certain amount of defects per million, meaning that, if you make a million of these devices or products, only you can expect a very low number of failures, and that would be caught by your product testing. So you're not going to put out any defective devices on the market if you design everything correctly and you're doing the right amount of testing, et cetera. And these things get validated into the process so that you're pulling enough samples to test. If you can't 100% test every device, you sample enough to be able to prove that you can validate your process in order to make enough acceptable product where you're not testing every single device. So, because some of these tests can be destructive, for example, so you're not going to be able to sell anything if you test everything and destroy everything. So there's a couple different trainings that go into it, but then on the job training, of course, meaning actually getting your feet wet and jumping into the fire, as it were. Just learning on the job goes a long way as well, especially if you're in an industry that you don't technically have a background in. If as I jumped into Medtronic, I didn't have a healthcare background, but they were willing to teach me that, and I was definitely, you have to be open to learning and have a curiosity, and natural curiosity goes a long way. And having a technical background would help as well. So if you're going into an industry that you may not know very well, being very curious and having a technical background so you can kind of take your understanding of one subject area and be able to transfer those skills into a different industry, it makes things a lot easier for you and your employer. So, depending on the employer, they may not be able to invest 2 years before he can hit the ground running. Very few, probably, to be honest with you. But if you're able to come in and show some value over the first few months and kind of get with the program, if you will, certainly many companies are going to be willing to work with people to help them find their niche, if it will. And I was lucky enough to find my niche in healthcare, starting with Medtronic. So I'm very thankful to
Yeah.
them. And actually, I'm going to be actually returning to Medtronic very shortly to do they had a need for a short-term contract. And so I'm going to be filling in for somebody there shortly for
That's
just another
awesome.
year. So I
Yeah,
happened to be
that's great.
available. They had the opportunity, and I said sure, and so we made it work.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to be returning after about. I think I was there about 7 years ago is when I left. So it'll be interesting to see
Wow.
how things have changed.
Right, and you're coming in from an outsider's perspective, consulting
Yeah,
or contracting. It's always a
yeah,
little
exactly.
different than being within the thick of it, but it always comes back to this one piece that always comes across in every conversation. Don't ever burn a bridge faster than you can swim. Are there people you know at Medtronic then too, that were
There
there
are some
7
that are
years
still,
ago?
yeah, there are a lot that are still there. Although I'm going back on a different platform. I'm going to be supporting the robotics surgery platform. Whereas I said earlier, I was on soft tissue biosurgery mechanical devices. So a little bit different scope wise or project type wise. But I think, the standard procedures are quite similar. But there's going to be a learning curve for sure on my end. But I'm up for the challenge because, as I said, you have to be open to learning new things and new experiences. And through my whole career, now I'm in my mid 40s, so I've been doing this for 25 plus years. I enjoy going into new challenges. And I think especially in today's environment, you almost have to be very flexible because people stay at jobs a lot shorter than they used to. One, companies don't have employees around. Well, for whatever reason, people tend to change jobs a lot more often these days. And companies are always innovating, so you're going to have to be comfortable with change.
Right.
And companies will switch gears. They may have a certain corporate path for a year or two and then change. They may make an acquisition or be acquired or something, and their entire pipeline changes. So you have to be open for change. And until you get
Yeah,
comfortable with
yeah.
change, it's going to be really, I should say, unless you get comfortable with change, you're going to have a really hard time. That's all I can
Yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what happened when I switched jobs just recently, right? Just going from
Yeah.
the life sciences to solely focusing on packaging. There are so many
Yes.
terms I just didn't know. I didn't know what thermoforming meant, but there's YouTube. My husband's a mechanical engineer, so I was pulling out the textbooks and learning on the spot and starting to identify all the different plastics components. And you're like, oh, this is so
Yes.
cool. But I find it kind of adds some fun to a job when you're constantly learning something new. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Absolutely. I think, it would, for me personally, it would be very boring if I was doing a similar job for 30 years. I would get very bored easily. And part of that's because I just have naturally a lot of different interests, but also
Yeah.
things change. I think it's in our culture nowadays, whether you want to call it, the people are always, you know, their attention span gets shorter and shorter over time, it seems. That's probably part of it. But I think part of it, there's so much innovation that now we're so used to everything changing so fast that if something takes longer than 5 minutes, we get very impatient as a society. So, kind of,
Yeah.
unless you're willing to, very few people are not able to deal with change, I think, nowadays because of that. You're just always changing. And, some of the, if you met me maybe 25, 30 years ago, maybe it would have been different. But now, I'm very comfortable with change. I think early in my career, maybe not as much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it kind of explains, right, your long stint there at Medtronic, but now you're
Yeah,
doing
true. I didn't think of it that way.
consulting as well, right? And that's constantly changing. That's a new project, new client, new manager.
Yeah.
What is some advice for anyone looking to get into consulting? What have you learned?
Yeah. So I've done contract work, consulting for the last 7 years ish since leaving Medtronic. And most of those were 1 year assignments, let's say. It's good and bad. I think it depends on your situation. Not bad. I'm sorry. It's good for certain people and not as good for other people, I should say. I shouldn't say good and bad because it depends on your situation. If you're able to have the flexibility to take a contract role where you may or may not be able to get benefits as part of your situation. If you have a spouse who has benefits, then it makes it very easy. I happen to have a spouse who she's a teacher and she has good benefits, and I'm able to bounce around pretty freely. So that makes it a lot easier for me. Somebody that is the sole provider for a family, it's going to be a lot more difficult to find to jump easily, anyways, unless you find a consultant agency that offers benefits, or you find a competitive benefits on the private market, which I'm guessing that's not very, not as viable of a solution. But if you're able to do consulting, I recommend it if you want to learn a lot of stuff over a short period of time, meaning you can jump from, one company each year for a few years and learn quite a bit. Over the last 7 years, I've learned, a lot about roughly, I think it was about 5 different companies over the last 7 years. And I've learned about combination drug delivery devices, so auto injectors, on-body delivery systems, which I
Yeah.
probably to this day would not have been able to get that with Medtronic specifically. But I do have a couple, 2.5 years of experience doing that type of work. I have experiences running clinical trials. I have experience running data management teams for a CRO, managing clinical trials for other pharmaceutical companies, some of the large ones, and even small biotechs. And even doing some type of project work for a couple of companies, mergers and acquisitions, I should say. Having those capabilities, even if it's just for a year or two, really broadens your ability to market yourself as a professional and say, yes, I have that
Yeah.
experience. I have a couple of years doing, and I have a couple of years doing combination drug delivery devices, and I spent 10 years in medical devices. I mean, that makes it a lot easier to jump into something with another company, either for the short term or long term. I find myself at some point probably going to end up looking for something that's more permanent, because I did take the 6 or 7 years to develop skills in different
Yeah.
contracts. But I think after a while, I don't want to be jumping jobs for the rest of my career. I don't think so. At some point, I do want to seek out a role that I can stay for the duration, and that's probably sooner rather than later, meaning over the next couple of years. So, yeah, it's been fun doing the contracts, and I've learned a lot. But I think at some point, I do want to kind of find something a little more stable, just for mental well-being, but
Yeah.
also that way I can really establish myself again with the company. And I really enjoyed staying the time I did with Medtronic and ATMI for those 2 long stints.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now you also know what you're specifically looking for, right? Hey, I
Does
like
help.
this specific piece. Yeah. I enjoy doing this. It'll be a little easier for you to go back and be retrospective and say, oh, I'm looking for something very specific in this category. I want to work with injectors. I want to work with combination devices. I'll find those companies, which I think is pretty cool, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It could have been that it was not my experience, but it could have been my experience that I stumbled upon a company and worked for a year doing something I didn't like. I happen to like
Right.
the things I've worked on, but I could have jumped into something that was nothing like I thought it was going to be, and absolutely hated it. And in retrospect, said I'm never doing that again. And so in that way, it might have been good for me, long term, to say, yeah, I don't really want to do that again. So yeah,
Yeah.
it goes both ways, but yeah, for the most part, it's been all positive for me.
So here, just to wrap things up, what is the best piece of advice you'd leave others who are looking to follow in your footsteps?
Hmm. That's a good. There's a lot of answers I can think of. So I think being open to change is definitely a big one, and I would say being your own best advocate is definitely going to take you a lot of places. So don't ever get comfortable with the status quo. If you want to grow in your career and you want to learn new things and you want to grow your, within a company, or always voice yourself and put yourself in uncomfortable positions is what I would say. Is if you're in a role and you're not getting visibility, try to push yourself to present in front of VPs, directors, or what have you. Take on extra projects. Take on, if you have the ability to mentor somebody. I love mentoring people. That's one of the best parts of my job, is being able to kind of pass the baton in some way, in some small way, to be able to help another employee, or coworker or colleague, whatever you want to call them, and help them by what you learned so they can accelerate even faster than you did in your career, and kind of pay it forward. Because I've had a couple of mentors in my career that I was lucky to have, and it was really helpful. They have a lot to pass along, from their career, and you may not copy and paste everything they do. It may not fit for you, but certainly there's more than likely going to be something you can learn from other people. Reach out to people that you admire at your job and at your company, even if you don't work for them directly. I'm sure there are people in adjacent departments that you look upon as they're really successful at what they do. I always see them presenting to upper management. They know their stuff. They're always getting called upon for extra, not pet projects. That makes it sound negative, but like for projects to really, they're always the one that seems to be out there. Seek those people out. The ones that always seem to be, getting their hands dirty in other people's work, because those are the people that are most often promoted, and the ones that have more exciting careers. So that's what I would say. I don't know if that
Yeah.
exactly answers the question, but that's the
No,
best
I
advice.
love that. Yeah, I love that, right? Getting in front of the right people and building your network, because the more people you know, the better off you are in a weird way, because you never know where you'll be. And if you're going to be looking for a new job, it's good to know as many people as possible and reach out then one
Absolutely.
day in the future, and then continue to nurture those relationships as you go.
Yeah, and one thing where you said reach out to different people. One thing I would like to plug, not personally, but LinkedIn. I cannot tell people enough how beneficial LinkedIn has been for me personally. But it also gives you a voice to be able to publish and share content. And I know that, I mean, it depends on your personality. I like to read a lot about a lot of different industries within healthcare, whether it's pharmaceutical drugs or trends in the industry, medical
Yeah.
devices, combination drug delivery. I share a lot on LinkedIn, and in doing that, I've built a fairly large network, and that helps you learn more. But it also helps you if you're looking for a job down the line, or looking for a certain company with certain capabilities. You can rely on that network to help you find jobs that may not be posted on LinkedIn or some of the other job boards, and they might be able to steer you in a direction where you have first dibs on something that might be coming to LinkedIn. So you'll be first in line, or among the first in line. So I find
Yeah.
LinkedIn quite useful, and obviously it's free. I mean, they do have a premium version, but you get plenty of value from the free version. I've tried the premium version with some success, but it's pretty expensive, to be honest with you. So the free version is
Yeah.
very valuable. And if you have the capability to use it, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I love following company pages as well, just to see, hey, what are some of the new products that they're developing? I see there's a new plastic being used for blister packs. I'm like, oh, that's
Yeah,
so cool. And then you go down a rabbit hole early in the morning.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
enjoy it very much. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time tonight. I greatly appreciate you taking the time to share your background, some of your insights. And it's always great to meet folks like yourself. I know we work together at Network Partners. I've only heard great things about you from everyone. So again, appreciate your time, and thank you for joining me tonight.
Of course, thank you very much for having me. It is a pleasure. If you ever need me or want me to join another one, if you have a panel or something, whatever, I'll be happy to join.
Thank you for joining us on What Do You Do? We're excited to have had you with us today. Be sure to tune in next week for more inspiration, empowerment, and fresh insights into fascinating careers. Whether you're discovering a profession you've never heard of or finding new perspectives on familiar roles, there's always something for everyone. If you're interested in sharing your own journey, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a private message and let's connect. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious. I'm Amanda Averill, and this has been What Do You Do, where we delve into the diverse world of STEM careers. Thanks for listening.